To me, the important thing about teaching is that we have to have images of teaching, images of our students that are relevant and real. And one of the big mistakes I think we make is we think of teaching as simply pouring facts into inert students, like they're an empty vessel and our job is to fill them up. But if you step back from that for a minute, you realize that teaching is really, really, at its base, teaching is intellectual and ethical work. And teaching is filled with intellectual challenges and ethical considerations. And so for me, the most important message to teachers is think through what your commitments are, what your ethical commitments are, what your moral commitments are to your students, and build your teaching project from there. So for example, I think if you know your commitments and you say, one of my commitments is to the full development of every human being who comes into my classroom. If you start there, then you begin to say things like, well, who is this person? Is this person a three-dimensional creature like myself? Does this person have more dimensions than just a cognitive dimension? For example, is this student an ethical person or a potentially moral person? Does this person have a spirit as well as an emotional life, as well as a physical body? All these things have to be taken into consideration. And for me, the primary ethical commitment that I want students to make, that I want teachers to make, is the commitment to see every human being who comes into your classroom as fully worthy of your full attention and as a person who's active in their own learning. So I want to make a commitment to the unity of humanity and to the value of each human being. Now this has very, very serious implications. For example, instead of seeing my students as empty vessels that I'm filling up, or instead of seeing my students as a canvas upon which I'm painting, or a glob of clay that I'm shaping the way I want to shape, I begin to say, well, this student comes to me with a history, with aspirations, with hopes, with dreams, with some skills already mastered. How do I engage this student? So my metaphor for my students is, rather than a collection of deficits that I have to correct, I think of my students as unruly sparks of meaning-making energy on a voyage of discovery. What that means is that every one of them is a little bit different than every other one of them. They're not the same. I can't kind of layer onto them the same treatment and expect anything good to happen. I have to recognize their incredible wild diversity and at the same time their fundamental unity. Now that's a contradictory idea. They are each different and yet they're part of the bigger humanity. How do I execute that in the classroom? How do I realize both their distinctiveness and uniqueness on the one hand and their commonality on the other? And for me, I think that leads me to say, well, part of my teaching has to be involved in asking questions, not just giving answers. Part of it has to be to interrogate the situations themselves. Part of it has to be to create the conditions where each of my students can become an author, an artist, a creator, a writer. Each of them can express themselves in their own unique ways. And that's part of the curriculum that I have to develop based on how I see them, not as empty vessels, but as sparks of meaning-making energy, moving through life. You know, the great philosopher, Khalil Gibran. Is that how you pronounce it? Khalil Gibran.
Yes, Khalil
Gibran. One of his famous statements is the idea that young people don't belong to us. Young people have their own lives, and they're like arrows into the future. My children are already living in a world that I could not have foreseen 40 years ago. And my grandchildren will live in a world that I have no idea about. So my job is not to shape them for today's world, but rather to unleash their energy toward a world that they will experience, that they will shape. And that means much more attention to attitudes and curiosity and feelings of power and strength and feeling that you yourself can name the problems that you see before you and can solve them. If you come through the experience of school with a sense of your own empowerment and your own capacity and your own ability to question and debate and come to conclusions and seek evidence and express yourself. If those are the qualities you pick up in my classroom, then I'm a success. If you get a few facts, but you don't have an attitude toward life that's one of curiosity and strength and confidence and boldness, then you're in trouble.
How about the teaching of moral?
Teaching ethics, I think that we teach moral behavior and we teach ethical action every minute of every day, whether we know it or not. In other words, if I'm a teacher who comes into a classroom and I treat the students like objects and I'm authoritarian and I beat them down and I make them bend their wills to my will, that's an ethical statement right there. I'm telling them something about the value in the world. If I ignore, if for example I'm teaching in a classroom in the United States where there are grotesque racial disparities, racial differences, where some classrooms black people are treated poorly simply because they are black. And if I ignore that, if I don't mention it, if I don't try to address it, that's a moral statement too. By my silence, I'm making a moral statement. So one of the reasons I urge young teachers to come to grips with what moral commitments they bring to the classroom is because you will teach morals whether you mean to or not. And what I want to argue, and I do argue in my writing and in my teaching, that every young teacher should think, these are the commitments. Every morning I wake up, these are the commitments that I bring to the classroom. And I want to urge you to at least consider one moral commitment being a commitment to the full humanity of every person. That is the unity of humanity. That is a commitment that this wildly diverse human being before me is a full human being, and I have to treat them with awe, with reverence, and with respect. A second commitment I would urge is that we recognize that we don't know everything simply because we're the authority of teacher, that we have to be in dialogue with our students. And dialogue is a pedagogical gesture that's both the most democratic and the most dangerous. It's dangerous because it decenters our dogma, it decenters our certainty, but it's also liberating because we might learn something new. Instead of being a know-it-all teacher, I urge teachers to become teachers who are questioning, not the commander of the ship, but a pilgrim on a voyage of discovery with your students. That means dialogue. That's a second commitment. A third commitment is to tell the truth as you see it, and to be open to the fact that everything you see is not right. That is, to open your eyes, and by opening your eyes, allowing your students to open their eyes. This is something that's very, very difficult to do. One example from literature is from a novel by David Malouf. No, I'm sorry, it's by Amir Malouf. And the novel is called Samarkand. And in Samarkand, it's about part of it is about a young British teacher named Howard Baskerville teaching in Persia.
1 minute. Okay.